Well, welcome everyone to our June edition of the Small Business Webinar Series. First of kind of our summer sessions here. Couple of reminders just about this series before we get started. One thing, we do record the sessions, so if you missed one of our prior sessions, they are housed on the same website that you logged into this session from. So if you missed one or want to review one or share it with somebody that wasn't able to attend, please direct them to our website and we will they can watch the video there. And most of the time we've also posted a copy of the presenter's slides. So please feel free to use that resource whenever it's convenient for you. Just a reminder of our sponsors for today: Montana State University Extension, the University of Montana Small Business Development Center, the Great Falls Economic Development Authority, with the Small Business Development Center there as well, Montana Economic Development Association, Montana Department of Commerce, the Small Business Development Network, all come together to make this program available to you at no cost each week. So thank you to each of those groups that helps bring this together. If you've got some ideas for additional topics you'd like to see, please feel free to send those to me, to Jason, or to Jennifer as well, and we'll see if we can incorporate those into future months' sessions as well. Today, we get the honor of having Alistair Stewart with us, and he's going to talk about business transition readiness. If you haven't worked with Alistair, he works for the Montana Manufacturing Extension Center, which is based here at MSU, affiliated with the College of Engineering here, and it's a pretty interesting groups of folks over there with some really great resources that can be available to a lot of small business clients. They've got a long history of helping small businesses across the state improve things, from whether it's energy efficiency, whether it's consulting, whether it's financing. They've just done an awful lot of work in those areas and are really great resource. So Alistair brings a lot of history. He worked with the U.S. Department of Commerce's Montana Extension Partnership out of Chicago. He's been worked for private sector firms as well, Giga Information. He's also been with Baxter Healthcare, British Gas, the British Technology Group. We're all places that he's worked and got some great experience that he's able to share with us a little bit here. He's got a Master of Science degree in Managerial Communications from Northwestern University. He's also has a Certified Exit Planning Advisor from the Exit Planning Institute in 2016. I think that's going to be particularly relevant to today's topic. Also, he's a pretty avid fly fisherman. We had a little discussion about that before we got things started. Active in Trout Unlimited and other cold water conservation organizations. Maintains residence here in Bozeman, but also spends some time in Chicago as well. So, Alistair, with that, if you would like to tell us a little bit about business transition readiness, we would appreciate it. And please send questions in through the chat window throughout or ask them at the end.
Very good. Thank you, Joel, and good morning, everybody, and welcome. So we're going to spend a few minutes today learning about business transition readiness and ensuring a higher likelihood of success. And I come to this arena through my family's experience. My great-grandfather had a number of butcher's shops in Portsmouth on the south coast of England, and very successful, provided his three children, my mother, my aunt, and my uncle, with a pretty good living. But as my grandfather aged, he transferred the business to my uncle, his son. David was the youngest of the three, and David took a successful business with a number of butcher's shops, and in 5 years drove it off the cliff into bankruptcy. And I'm, that family memory really is what many years ago sparked my interest in ensuring that family-owned small businesses don't follow a similar path, which is all too common. Small and medium-sized businesses are the backbone of America's economy. And there's a very unfortunate set of data about what happens as the founders of the business age out. Very, very few of the small and medium-sized businesses that were started 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago actually make it to the second generation. And of that small handful that make it to the second generation, a tiny handful make it to the third generation. There's a bunch of data out there from various sources. It's all of variable quality. So I'm not going to say that this data is precise. I'm going to suggest that it's directionally accurate. It's indicative. Somewhere around 80% of businesses don't actually make it to the next generation, and of that 20% that make it to the next generation, a small single-digit percentage make it to the third generation. And if you think about the accumulated value that is just lost when those businesses go away, it's just staggering. So we're going to take a look today at some things that will enable small business owners a greater likelihood of being in the successful few. And it really all starts with getting some clarity. There's nothing more valuable than clarity, and yet it's one of the hardest things to achieve. Without a clear understanding of what it is you're trying to achieve, it's impossible to focus. Focus is what allows us to separate the critical few from the trivial many and spend our time more wisely. But many times we have business owners who are unable to be clear about what matters most to them. At the end of the day, owner motives matter most. And yet, getting motive clarity eludes almost everybody. We typically see this where business owners want that trifecta of liquidity, legacy, and an ongoing involvement with the business without having executive responsibilities. And that's really hard. And so I'm going to suggest that legacy matters. And when you have a business that's set up to manifest the legacy that you want, continuing to be a great employer in the small town where you've operated for 40 years, that gets you more liquidity. Where you're unable to separate your family and emotions and the complexity of family relationships from the rationality of running a business, things start to go sideways. A very common example is the emotional weight that the next generation might feel, the obligation that they might feel to carry on the family ownership, stewardship, management of the business, even though in their hearts they might want to do something else and their talents might not be best suited to that. And those family dynamics are really hard to work through. And we're going to look at some risks that threaten outcomes that an owner might want when the owner is capable of getting outcome and motive clarity. And we really need to think about the three legs of an owner's stool and how the business fits in there. Most owners contemplating a sale of their business, where they've invested so much of their life, they're kind of thinking about, okay, what's next? What's next? What am I going to do with the third act of my life? What am I going to do with regard to my family, with my health? I want to travel because I've just spent so much time running this business. I really haven't traveled like I want to. I want to see more of the world. What hobbies and leisure interests do I have? I've always wanted to learn Spanish or Mandarin or Portuguese. I want to be more involved in my faith community. I want to be more involved in, or even step up in a leadership role in my local community. Maybe there's a profession that's associated with my business and I want to become more active in a professional or trade association. Right? There's a whole bunch of things. that a business owner could be thinking about for the third act of their life. And so these three legs of the stool are all interconnected and interdependent. Disassociating an owner from the business can be really hard because it's what they've got up and done every day since time immemorial, right? At some point, if a business owner is no longer the business owner, he or she is going to wake up in the morning, go on autopilot and start driving to the business, but there's no office, there's no place, there's nowhere for them to go. That's really hard, right? There's a sense of identities wrapped up in the business. And that leads to a lot of family dynamics that maybe an owner isn't prepared for. Are you prepared legally and financially? If you've got a number of kids with varying degrees of interest and time commitment to the business, and maybe some of them have worked in it, maybe none of them have worked in it, but there's a lot of financial implications. Often that fully thought out third act of life has a cash flow requirement that exceeds the ability of existing investments to feed. So wherever we've got our treasures stored up, it might be insufficient for the most fully realized third act of life. And one way of closing that cash flow gap for the fully realized third act of life is by realizing all the potential value that's in the business. And this leads us to some really substantive work. So when we say transition-ready businesses are more valuable, right? And the more value we've got, the greater the ability we have to either close the gap between the cash flow enabled by our existing treasure chest and the fully realized third act of life, or even to expand that fully realized third act of life. What does it mean to say that transition-ready businesses are more valuable? Well, there's a number of characteristics of a transition-ready business, and it really starts with those two strategy questions: where are we going, and how are we going to get there? And once we've got clarity on where we're going, we can focus on how to get there. Typically, sales and marketing in small businesses is not thought of as a process, right? It can be dependent on individuals. There is no sales and marketing playbook. Operations might also depend on skills and tribal knowledge that exist in the heads of an owner. We often find that many small businesses are not focused on the financial metrics and processes that matter most, but rather we run on QuickBooks, and there's a standard report that comes out of QuickBooks, and I look at the bank accounts and make sure that we've got cash on hand to meet our obligations, but we might not be looking at things such as profitability per product, profitability per customer, profitability per location, and managing a complex portfolio. Sometimes it's really straightforward. And often the financial partner to a small business, the bank, the primary financial partner, will have tremendous resources that are available, but yet the business owner is insufficiently attentive to those resources, doesn't take advantage, and a lot of financial performance is sacrificed. Businesses face many risks. Today, we live in what we call a VUCA environment, a high VUCA environment. What's VUCA? Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. On the 23rd of February this year, I was making sure that the gifts that I had arranged to be delivered to my wife on the 24th of February, her birthday, were going to show up on time, just like I had scheduled and paid for them. And Vladimir Putin was telling the world that he wasn't going to invade Ukraine. Well, on my wife's birthday, everything changed, right? Back in very early 2020, we were contemplating COVID, and we didn't really understand it, right? So we had a couple of tremendous shocks in our hyper-connected global environment that we live and work in. Even if you're in small town Montana, you are part of a hyper-connected global economy. And businesses tend not to think about risks that face the business. When you've got all of these factors in play, you increase your transition readiness, you increase the value of the business, and that means you have more and better exit options. There's a big universe of exit options that are now available. Could be an intergenerational transfer, could be sale to a management team, could be sale to employees, could be sale to a competitor, could be sale to a financially motivated investor who's going to bring in a manager or a management team. Could be a sale to a strategic player where you represent a quicker, more certain path to achieving something for them than if they had to build it on your own. But all these factors play into making a business more transition ready and more valuable. So often there is a gap between what the owner thinks the business is worth and what a dispassionate, financially motivated potential investor might think of the value of the business and the price that potential new investor would be willing to pay. And there are three standards of value, right? How do we determine the value of a business? There are three standards. The most dangerous standard, but it's one of the most common, is the country club or hunting buddy standard. My hunting buddy sold his business, which is kind of like mine, and he told me he got X for it. Man, mine's bigger and better, so it's worth more than X. Well, we don't really know. We don't really know. The second standard of value is something called the fair market value standard. You pay somebody who's got a credential, a fee. They do financial archaeology, and then they go to a book of comps, and they pass through the comps. They look at your financials back for 3 or 5 years, and they come up with a range of values and a number. And fair market valuation is often most useful when judges and courts and attorneys are involved. Most businesses that do change control, that do change hands, do so because of death, disability, divorce, distress, or disagreement. And in those most common 5D scenarios, we need a fair market value. And the third standard of value is an operational value assessment. And this says, hey, the business is a sausage making machine. You give it ingredients, you crank the handle, and sausages come out. Or in a business sense, right, we have inputs to the business operates, and it throws off free cash flow. The operational value assessment is a quantitative and qualitative assessment of a range of values, and it identifies the value of a business today to a rational, dispassionate financial investor, the potential value that lies in the business, the levers that can be pulled to move from the current value to the potential value, and it also identifies the risks that threaten the value of a business. Now, there are three ways that we can make a business more valuable. We can grow it. We can bring it to market, assuming that there is a universe of potential buyers. We can bring it to market better. We can hire a business broker. If it's big enough, we can go through an investment banking process. Those are interesting. The third way, and the most significant way to make a business more valuable, is to de-risk it. And common business risks are undue reliance on the owner, customer concentration, no processes, supplier risk. But all these risks that threaten value can be addressed. But it requires an understanding of what the risks are before we can begin to address them. So I'm just going to show some data from some operational value assessments that we did back in 2017 and 2018. Just representative to get you guys in the audience, and guys and gals in the audience, thinking. I pulled a small sample of 11 companies which had together combined revenue of $56.8 million. We did an operational value and determined that the current enterprise value of those 11 companies was just shy of 40 million. They had a combined potential enterprise value of almost 60 million. That's a value gap of close to $20 million, 50% of the current value, or 33% of the potential value is the value gap, meaning 50% of the current value would be left on the table without clarity and focus, without a plan to de-risk and pull the levers, and tremendous lifestyle impacts for the owner, the owner's family, and the community in which that business operates. Now, I suggest that for risk management, we look at a number of resources. The Small Business Administration has a fantastic risk management presentation. It also has a very practical, hands-on, easy-to-use risk management workbook for owners to work through, identifying and addressing the risks. And I would also look at economic indicators. I'm sure we're all aware that there's an increasing sentiment or a sentiment that predicts the increasing likelihood of an economic slowdown. And everybody's got a different opinion. Is it going to be a recession? Is it going to be short and painful with a long recovery? Is it going to be protracted? But I would encourage small business owners to be looking out the windshield at a variety of economic indicators and planning for the scenarios that seem most credible. And of course, the operational value assessment, which identifies the risks that threaten value, the specific risks that threaten value in a business. So let's take a look at some company-specific risk here. Two businesses, very similar, but with different values. So Tom's got a business. Company's been around 18 years. It's a niche manufacturer. John's business, the same. They both got $3.5 million of revenue, and they've got some earnings before interest, taxes, and depreciation of $200,000 from that $3.5 million in revenue. Revenue growth for both has been modest, but look at the transferable enterprise value. $400,000 for Tom, $1 million for John. There's a 2x multiple on Tom's business, but a 5x multiple on EBITDA on John's business. What's going on here? Well, we'll look at that in a moment. But there's another factor at play here where the low transferable enterprise value, right, leads to a price value gap because Tom is going to be in denial about that low enterprise value that could be potentially transferred, and it's going to frustrate a sale. And having looked at many companies like this and the associated data over the years, the Exit Planning Institute believes, based on data that as a result of national surveys, that a low transferable enterprise value has an 80% likelihood of frustrating a sale. The owner has a value expectation, and the potential buyer has a price that they're willing to pay, and there's a big gap. So what are some of the company-specific risks that destroyed Tom's transferable enterprise value and increased John's? Tom has high customer concentration. John does not. Tom has 40% of his revenue coming from a single customer. John has no more than 10% of his revenue coming from a single customer. Again, this is a manufacturer. It could be the same in distribution. Retail, perhaps a little different. Tom's business is completely dependent upon Tom. The customer information is in Tom's inbox. John, no, dependency is low. John does not own the relationships with key customers and key suppliers. They have a business system, and all the information about contacts and relationships, conversations, contracts, all documented in a system. Tom has really low quality systems. He's been reluctant to invest. John recognizes that there's a tremendous return on investing in good system. Tom works hard to get new business. New profits are not guaranteed, assured, or very certain. John has a high certainty of future revenues and future profits. He doesn't have to work as hard to get that money in the door. So the challenge for business owners is this balance of in versus on. It's really about learning to stop having your future taken hostage by working in the business and instead choosing to work on the business. Focus on doing the highest value activities and tasks, and that really means de-risking the business. And that makes the business better if it's an intergenerational transfer, and it makes it more valuable if you're selling it outside of the family. So just because the total enterprise value is higher doesn't mean for an intergenerational transfer um, that it's necessarily going to transact at that value. It should, and I would encourage that it does. But it also often opens up the options for many more categories of potential new owners. So I'm going to stop there and see if we have any questions.
Well, thanks, Alistair. We've had 3 questions come in. Let's start with the first one. How long do you recommend business owners start to work on a transition plan prior to the date they hope to sort of exit the business?
Yeah, Joel, that is a great question, and I'm gonna give an answer which may shock people, but the day you start the business is the day you prepare to transition the business. Now, I understand that's not possible in many cases, but when you start a business, start with the end in mind. Now, all right, you've got a business that's been around 20, 30 years. I think a 3-year runway is the minimum. And the more time beyond that 3 years you can get, the greater the degree of value that you can create in the value and subsequently realize.
All right, so never too early to start, it sounds like there.
That's right. That's right. But 3 years really is the minimum that it takes, right? You can't do much in a year, and any investor doing appropriate diligence is going to do a long look back on the financials, minimum of 3 years, right? So short-term window dressing is not really going to cut it.
All right. Let's move on to our next one. And for those of you watching here, after our 3rd question, I'll open it up either to more questions in the chat window, or if people want to ask a question, they'll be able to do that too. So if you've got a question, get ready. You'll have a chance here to ask it soon. So the next one is, how do you feel about phased retirement plans, possibly with a slow transition of stock ownership to a new owner?
Absolutely. I think that's a great idea, particularly where there's tribal knowledge in the owner or the management team that hasn't been fully documented and institutionalized, right? That mechanism de-risks everybody's de-risks for everybody. So yes, under appropriate circumstances, I believe that's a successful path. Now, sometimes owners just want to be done, right? I just want to be done. It depends on the ability of the buyer to pay for the business, right? Can we do a cash transaction? Do we need to do a stock transaction? And how is that going to work over a longer time frame? But yes, I am a fan under the right circumstances of that path.
All right, so the last question that came in along the way was, is the success rate for transitions higher when it's to a non-family member or if it's to a family member of the owner?
Oh my gosh, what a great question. That is a great question. I believe it's higher when it's to a non-family owner because they will have done due diligence and know what they're getting into. In a family situation, there are so many dynamics, right? There's the emotional weight that both generations might feel, right? I've seen a number of businesses where the second generation, it was if they had complete choice, they wouldn't do it, but they felt the need to carry on the family legacy. Sometimes that second generation or third generation hasn't proven their chops outside of the business. right? When there's a potential for the next generation to take over the business, there is a best practice which every family must do, which is leave the family business, go and work somewhere else, prove your capabilities, prove your chops, earn the pay based on what you deliver to the company, develop your skills, and then come back. Where there isn't that best practice, we have a greater likelihood of unhappiness after intergenerational transfer. And again, these are broad generalizations, right? Every family is different. Every family business is different.
All right. Well, thanks. We've had another question come in. I also want to point out that Jennifer put a resource to an SBA risk management program link there in the chat window as well. But our next question, Alistair, is when preparing a business for a sale, where should a seller look for their buyer?
Yes, what a fantastic question, right? We want to shape the business to be compellingly attractive to a defined universe of buyers. And that is so company, industry, market, geography specific. And that's really where an external advisor can help. And I would encourage whoever asked that question or others in the audience to whom that question is interesting, please contact us so that we can maybe provide some context and resources to begin identifying that resource of, that universe of potential buyers. That's a very complex question, and it's a very powerful question when addressed correctly.
So let me ask a follow-up question myself, just in general. Where would you send people for additional resources, whether it's services you all offer or services that you refer clients to as well?
Yeah, I mean, so I would encourage that small business owners have a conversation with their banks, right? The banks have access to tremendous resources, including a big resource that's widely available through banks that most business owners don't take advantage of is the Risk Management Association's data. RMA has industry analyses where you can look at an appropriate level of comparison. Could be size, for example, revenue per employee, profits per employee, inventory turnover, right? So you can understand, how does my business compare to like businesses? That's a resource. I would encourage that everybody who's contemplating a change of control in the foreseeable future, reach out to their regional or local SBDC director. They're a great source. And whatever other economic development organizations that are available to you, Great Falls Development Authority, for example, Northern Rocky Mountain Economic Development District, Prospera, Big Sky EDA, if you're in Billings, right? We're all over the state. And I would also strongly encourage that owners build a team around them for transition preparation. And that would include your banker, your CPA, your attorney. And I don't mean a corporate attorney, but often we need to be thinking, as a change of control is contemplated, about estates, wills, and trusts. You wouldn't believe the number of owners I talk to and say, well, hey, when was the last time your will was updated? You go, oh man, yeah, no, man, that was about 20 years ago, but we're still good with it. Well, have family and business circumstances changed much in the last 20 years? And often where there's going to be a big chunk of change coming to an owner, it can be tax advantaged, but that requires preparation. And your CPA and the right attorney with appropriate tax practice skills can help Uncle Sam remain a little less well off and allow the business owner and his or her family to be more well off.
All right. Well, that sounds like some valuable advice there, but building a good team there. Earlier, I missed a question that was a follow-up to the 3-year window there for getting things ready for a transfer. Can you provide a few more details about why what goes on in that 3-year
Yeah,
period?
absolutely. Thanks for asking, Joel. So the first thing we do is we assemble a transition readiness team, right? And this is not right. Okay, we're going to come together and this is what we're going to do. We get the resources together. The next thing we do is an operational value assessment. We then look at the data that provides and we ask ourselves the question, does the current operational value sufficiently provide financial support for the owner's family's interests? If it doesn't, we must go after the potential value and de-risk the business. And even if the owner has sufficient treasure socked away where the cash flow is going to support the fully realized third act of life, there's a conversation there which says, hey, look at that potential value number. Let's say it's 50% more than the current value number. What bigger, better, more fully realized third act of life is possible? And then we develop a plan, de-risk the business, and select the value creation levers that we want to pull. We probably don't want to necessarily focus on the value creation lever that's got the biggest dollar amount associated with it, because it might be the hardest to do. It might be the hardest to do. And so we march down that path, and a year after we've done the first operational value, we come back and we repeat. And we say, okay, how have we done? We repeat it a second time, right? We have a plan in the second year, we repeat it a second time, and we march down our next plan, and now we're looking at that third year. And there's going to be estates, wills, and trusts implications, right? If you don't have an estates, wills, and trust attorney on hand, pick 3 that you're interested in, talk to them, select one, but that takes time, right? That's just not instantaneous. Sometimes the books might not be in as good order as we need them to be, and that requires both cleanup of what's in the rearview mirror. It might involve upgrading the chart of accounts. It might include upgrading the bookkeeping skills that we've got in the business. We might be thinking about customer concentration, undue reliance on the owner, right? Very, very common risks that threaten value, and performing those de-risking activities, they take time, right? Doesn't happen overnight. Often, if we're considering selling the company outside of the business is more attractive and more readily transferable at a higher value when there's a management bench that the new owner can take advantage of, right? And if that management bench isn't there, the value's lower, the chances of success are lower. But it takes time. It takes time. So those are some key points about what we do over that minimum 3-year period.
All right. Well, that helped a lot clarify what tasks need to be taken there during that time leading up to that. That's all the questions that have come in. So I'm going to pause here. And if anybody wants to unmute and ask any follow-up questions, now's the time. I've been on some meetings where they have a specific awkward amount of time you're supposed to wait for a question to come in before moving on. So I think we've gotten there in terms of how long we pause. So Alistair, let me throw it back to you. Any final comments, anything you'd like to leave the group with?
Yeah, it's never too late to start, and start as soon as you possibly can with the end in mind.
All right, well, brief and concise. Thank you very much, Alistair. I certainly learned a lot today, and I'm sure there's a lot of steps to dig into if you're transitioning your business to make each of those bullet points happen. So for the rest of you, we will be back on July 7th at 11 o'clock for our July edition of the Small Business webinar series. Topic on that will be on the website pretty soon. So thank you all for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.